I want to thank all of you for coming. Veronica is in Mexico, but the One Work, 1 Hour program is thriving again this year. I especially want to thank Chris. She is one of our docents who is doing her performance twice because Megan was so wonderful to respect us so deeply and say that she would like to use some of the One Work, 1 Hour program to help with the docent class. So Chris has done this. This is her second performance. Bob Bernard did the one, as you know, on Ferdinand Howell, which was sensational. And the next one coming up, Ann Peterson will be doing the Schiller collection. And for us, that performance will be on the 17th, a Tuesday, at 1 o'clock. In the, well, the January one is for the class, but for the regular docent. See, we do it twice. She does it the 12th for the. Okay, and then in January. And then, well, for us, for the regular One Work, 1 Hour for the docents, it'll be on the 17th of January. That's a Tuesday. If some of you notice, Veronica, we've always tried to rotate through the days of the week, but it's very hard. So more have been on Tuesday this year. But Megan always has to deal with the scheduling issues, and so anyway, yes. Jenny? That will be on the 12th at 5:30. Those are always Thursday evening. And you're welcome to go to that, right? Well, the next one coming up, Gisela, it's the Schiller collection. And Ann Peterson will be doing it.
Did you all hear which painting is in Paris at the L'Orangerie?
Yes.
It's American Justice.
Yes.
Now,
The Joe Jones. Yeah. I know. I couldn't believe it either.
she sent that email. Kathy
I know.
Cunningham is over
To our team. All right, we've got a couple more coming in. Anyway, I just want to let you know that that will be the next thing. In February, Shuba will be doing the Amita Robinson. Veronica is going to do something wonderful for us. Well, actually, Bernard Pelchik will be doing One Work, 1 Hour in March, Veronica in April, and then Veronica and I just met. We're trying to come up with something really spicy and fun for the marathon in May. So we're moving along. Okay, everybody, are you ready? Let's thank Chris for going to all this trouble for us.
Well, thank you for coming. Can you hear me? Is the mic on?
not loud enough.
All right. I'll move this. Is this better? Okay, I'll just move my scarf to look a little asymmetrical. How's that? If something happens with the scarf and you can't hear me, just raise your hands or let me know, okay? I'm glad you're here. I don't think you have to take tons of notes because I have a list of all of the sources that I knew about of where the Siraks collected their work from. I have a listing of my references and a handout of the 77 works of art with information, and it's arranged as it was displayed in their home on the wall, so you can know what's in the dining room, etc. And these are photos that are taken from her book, My Story, The Love Story. And that's also on the list of references, so you can see that. There's also the monthly calendar that the Art Museum used to send out that has a detailed story about them, and that one even to the members listed what they generously gave it to the museum for and what the value was and what the museum paid for it. That's all in there. Dr. and Mrs. Sirak, can you hear me all right? Oh, Dr. and Mrs. Sirak began their collection in 1964 when they went to New York City for a weekend. They visited the gallery M. Noldler and Company, where Mrs. Sirak's father had bought a painting 14 years before. The gallery associate, Martin Jennings, showed them paintings, and two in particular interested them. One was Atlantic. This is by a Portuguese painter whose name is Maria Elena Vieira de Silva, and she was married to a French gentleman, and they lived in France. Martin Jennings told them, and I quote from Babette Sirak's book, which is on the list, Love Affair, "We'll ship it out at our expense. You can live with it for a month or two. If at the end you decide you don't like it and want to ship it back at no expense. It won't cost you a cent." They loved it. It was their first painting, and the collection, it's one of only 2 abstract paintings that they have in the entire Sirak collection. The other painting was Sunflowers in the Windstorm by Emile Nolde. And here you can see it. It was in their bedroom. This is a view from their bed. To learn about Nolde, they bought the book Emile Nolde and His Friends. Many painted in the expressionistic style. When the Siraks went back to New York 3 months later, Babs wrote that they went right to Knoedler's and bought the Nolde. They later saw Emile Nolde's retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. Once they found an artist that they liked, they looked for more works. Later, they were able to buy 2 Nolde watercolors, Steamboats and Sailboats, 1913, and Young Girl. The Siraks told us when we were in their home that they never bought art for an investment. They bought what they loved and what they wanted in their home to live with. They had no artworks in their closets. At this time, Dr. Sirak was a practicing surgeon in Columbus, and Mrs. Sirak was a busy mother with children, volunteering in their schools and doing the usual activities with parents, family, and friends who all lived in town. Looking back, they said they don't know how they did it. They were so enthralled and excited by what they saw. Every few months, they would fly to New York on a Friday, visit galleries and museums, and fly home on a Sunday. Before continuing with where they found their artworks, I'd like to tell how the Siraks decided to allow the museum to have the 78 works of art. And it was a greatly discounted price. Bud Bishop, the museum's director in 1981, called them and asked if he could stop by. Mrs. Sirak wrote that it was a beautiful summer's day and they sat on the porch. He asked, could the museum dare to hope that someday it might receive your collection? And if you remember Bud Bishop, you can just hear him saying that with his voice. They started 2 years of conversations with him at that time. The Siraks were both from Columbus and wanted their collection to always be together in their city. These were words that Mrs. Sirak wrote in her book. We grew over the years to feel we were only temporary custodians. The works had a life of their own. The most anyone can hope for is to be the guardian, responsible for keeping them safe the way parents are with their children. We wanted them to always be together in our city, Columbus. And for this reason, we decided to give them to the museum, or give them to the museum. That would assure that generations to come would enjoy this great art. In 1983, when the agreement was made, it was agreed that the art would stay in their home for a few years, and they would allow the public to come occasionally to view it in their home in Bexley. The Siraks were always hospitable. Beginning in 1967, the Siraks opened their home to friends, Columbus groups, art groups, and foreign visitors. They toured them around their home. So this was not new to them. What was new was that museum volunteers would be touring in their home. 21 docents, and this is in 1983, 21 docents studied and trained to tour in their home. Our nickname was Sirak Docents. Gisela Josenhans, Sally Jordan, and I are the ones who are still active docents. We started when we were 14. Dr. and Mrs. Sirak warmly invited us into their home to learn about their collection. They graciously gave us wonderful educational tours, giving us descriptions of each work and telling of their adventures in collecting. What great teachers they were. Bud Bishop also trained us at their home. We chose, each of us, to study an artist in depth and then present our artist and about the work that the Siraks had to the group. A bus for the tours to their home, a bus would bring people who had signed up for a tour from the museum to the Siraks' home, and during the drive, we would give a little introduction and guidelines for the tour. 4 docents would tour each time. If I remember, and maybe Gisela, you can tell me, I thought we were there for maybe an hour and a half. Is that right each time? And it was wonderful. Getting back to the art, the one on the left that you can't see too clearly that's in their bedroom is Cathedral by Lionel Feiniger. I'll show a front image of this later that is from our museum's library, visual library. But you can see where it is in their home. The other thing that was in this room in their home was The Embrace, a pencil drawing by Sheila. I'll mention that later. In 1965, the Siraks went to the Barnes Museum in Marion, Pennsylvania, and saw many works by Chaim Soutine. Again, the Siraks read all about him. The main library here in town, they said, was an excellent source of art books. Soutine was born in Lithuania, where his father was a cobbler and very poor. Soutine walked 1,000 miles to Paris and studied and copied at the Louvre. He was self-taught. In the early 1920s, Dr. Albert Barnes noticed a work by Soutine in Montmartre in a window. Chaim Soutine lived upstairs. Dr. Albert Barnes bought all of his work at that time, about 200 paintings. During their next visit to New York, they asked at Knoedler's if they had a Soutine. They had Landscape at Cogna, 1923. That's the colorful one, Landscape at Cogna, the one on the left. It's a French town overlooking the Mediterranean. The Siraks told us that when they visited Haute de Cogna 3 years later, the buildings looked exactly as they did in the painting, as if they were barely hanging on to slanting, leaning walls built by the Romans. Another source for their art, finding things, was a man named Ulfert Wilkie. He helped them find the Soutine on the left at the Silberman Gallery. It is Landscape at Sirak, 1920 to 21, painted earlier. It is a town in the Pyrenees. It has a different tone. You can see how monotone it is. It was painted just after Modigliani, his friend, who also lived and painted in Sirak, died. He died of influenza. They bought their third painting by Chaim Soutine, Melanie the School Teacher, from Knoedler's. On their own, they visited the Stamflies Gallery in New York. In a dark corner in a back room, they saw Paul Klee's Elfenberg. Whoops. Well, I'll have to go back to that. There it is. And they bought it. Again, they read about him and also read many of Paul Klee's writings. They wanted to find other Klees. Through their friend Wilkie, they met Fred Scheng, who collected Klees. When Scheng worked at Carnegie Hall, he saw a Klee in a gallery window on his way to work, and he bought it. For years, he collected Clay's artwork and wanted to sell some and set up a trust for his grandchildren. He told them how he got some wonderful clays. Clay was one of the artists who worked at and taught at the Bauhaus in 1922. They were all poor except for an American student. A German student, Gotha Schier, asked if the American student's father would send $200 in exchange for 8 clays, and the father agreed. 30 years passed. The little young girl went up to her parents' attic, and there she found a never-opened package. It was the clays. She smartly called a New York dealer who flew out and quickly bought them, brought them back to New York, and notified Fred Scheng of his find, who, of course, bought them right away. The marvelous thing about these paper drawings and paintings was that they were never exposed to light, never hung on walls, so they were in outstanding, not faded condition. Here's the 11 Sirak clays in an upstairs study. And I won't talk about them all, but that's most of them. An example of how their personalities connected with people they bought from. Fred Scheng was sent like a periodical magazine that was put out by a German art historian. And in it was a copy of Clay's sketchbook. And Fred Scheng gave it to the Siraks, and he wrote a note that read, "To my claymates, Babs and Howard Sirak, may you get from the works of this great man the same joy and thrill which he has given me, F. Scheng." With Wilkie's help, they found more clays in Switzerland. He was there when there was an exhibit at an art gallery, and he bought more for them, and they're on the list of the ones that he bought. On the left is Paul Clay's Still Life with Dove, and this was sent from Switzerland. On the back of it, it was on a masonite board, and on the back was this one, which was later someone named Composition. The Siraks sent it to a conservator who was able to split the masonite board, and they got 2 paintings out of it. This is the one that was in their bedroom. And Mrs. Sirak said that it reminds her of, let me see if I can find it here. It reminds her of the Delaunay's up in the hall above, which I'll get to later. They got this from Greta Feigl. She came to New York before World War II with her husband, and she took over the dealership of his works of art when he died. The Siraks had let dealers know that they were looking for a Feiniger. She called them at their hotel and said the former owners had brought it back for her to sell on consignment, and they were very happy to get it. Later, they found the watercolor Ship in Distress from 1946, and they bought that from a German dealer. Now we're in the upper hall. I'm sure you remember this one. And this is by Kirchner. I can't pronounce things too well. It's Landscape at Fehmarn with nudes. This they got from Greta Feigl. It's a scene from an island just off the northern coast of Germany where artists, writers, and friends went to work and play. They wanted to be part of nature going nude. 2 other Kirchner paintings in the collection are Tower Room Self-Portrait with Erna, 1913, and Sleeping Maiden, 1915. Mrs. Sirak told me that they found one in a catalog. And she also told us that Kirchner saw the Cézanne exhibit, retrospective exhibit, in Paris in 1906. the Siraks learned about Robert Delaunay when they were reading all about Paul Klee. They asked Martin Jennings at Knoedler's if he could locate any, and he found a French art dealer, Louis Carré, who had Portuguese Woman, the one on the left, 1916. He sent them a transparency. They bought it, and it was shipped directly from Paris to them. With Greta Feigl, they later found Air, Iron, and Water, 1936 to 7. It was entered into a competition to find an artist to paint a mural at the 1937 Paris Exposition in the Transportation Hall. He won. Mrs. Sirak told us she could see the interesting connection to Klee. Alfred Wilkie owned the next painting, Two Negroes in a Cafe. It's by Max Beckmann, and every time he went into a gallery and he was a friend of Max Beckmann's, and every time they were together, he would admire it. And finally, Max said, "If you like it so much, why don't you buy it?" And he said, "I can't afford it." He said, "Take it home and pay me a little when you can." And one day, after a while, Max Beckmann said, "You've paid enough, it's yours." It's fun how they have all these little stories. Mrs. Sirak described to us, and this is how she said it, to her it's loneliness of two strangers in a very crowded environment. And she sees them, there's a totem pole, she thinks that's what that is. She sees them not as Negroes or blacks, but as Indian, people from India. The Siraks saw to Jacques Raynal, which we had in the Picasso exhibit here this summer, at the Columbus Museum of Art. Then it was called the Gallery of Fine Art in 1965. It was a show organized by the Guggenheim. They found out that it was owned by the L. Hutton Gallery, and they could buy it after the traveling exhibit was over. Albert Glez's brother, and I think you all know this, brother-in-law, was killed in World War II, and he painted it as a tribute to him, including his regiment number, some attributes such as musical notes by his ear, and the year he was killed. Also in 1965, they saw a Klimt and Sheila exhibit at the Guggenheim. Again, they read about them. No oils were available, but they found 3 pencil drawings from a dealer, Otto Clear. These are Standing Portrait of Mademoiselle Bloch-Bauer, 1912, and The Embrace. They're both by Klimt. This is Egon Schiele self-portrait, 1914. The Sirak docents loved the aside remarks that the Siraks made as they toured their home. And Mrs. Sirak said, when we look at this portrait, we remember that Bill Klaas was crazy for this. Bill Klaas is one of the lecturers. He was from the National Gallery of Fine Arts, who came and trained all the docents just before it came to the museum in 1991. Tragically, Sheila died in the flu epidemic, and his wife and unborn child in 1918. The Siraks, you recognize these? The Siraks were reading a book about the Belgian artist James Ensor around the time of another weekend visit to New York. They visited Sam Saltz, a dealer who I'll talk about a little later, at his home. The Siraks had bought art at his home before and would visit him when they were in New York. They asked him if he knew anything about James Ensor. Sam immediately brought them up in the elevator and asked them to wait outside his storage room. And he brought out the assassination on the left. They loved the vivid reds. One lecturer told us at this time, Belgians love to put on small, gory plays, and that might be what was going on here. Also, Ensor loved puppetry, and his parents and grandparents owned a souvenir shop in a tourist area. So Others think it's a literal drawing. Make up your mind. Later, they read that Sam owned the one on the right. He had never mentioned it to them, but they asked him, and he said, yes, I own that. Would you like to buy it? You can buy it. So they bought that one from him, too. And these are up in a study upstairs where Paul Klay's work, Rock Flower, is also. Before starting on the first floor tour, I wanted to show one of 5 works in the collection by a French artist, Sirak. They were upstairs in Howard's dressing room. It is titled Notre Dame de Paris, or Notre Dame in Winter, 1913. The art dealer Sam Saltz, who I'll tell you about soon, found it at an auction preview, and he sent his secretary to bid on it, knowing that she would get a lower price than if he showed up and bid on it. Sam was a good friend of the Siganzaks. In 1967, the Siraks met Sam Saltz in Paris, and they had a lovely lunch with the Siganzaks. Their art purchases connected them with artists. Sam arranged that Vuillard's nephew take the Siraks on a tour at the Louvre that time, too. So there were a lot of nice connections there. This is the front entrance. Now I'll talk about how they met Sam Saltz. They met Sam Saltz when they were considering a third painting, and it was Fields of Wheat by Maurice de Vlaminck. And a runner mentioned to them that Sam was the great Impressionist art dealer in New York. He added, he only deals with people like the Fords, Mellons, and Rockefellers. He is inaccessible and very temperamental. Mrs. Sirak said that that was all Howard had to hear. And during their next visit to New York, Howard found his number listed in the phone book and called and told his name, that he was a doctor from Columbus, Ohio, and that he and his wife had just bought 2 paintings. They heard he was very knowledgeable and that he had beautiful paintings. Sam Saltz replied, "So how about tomorrow morning at 11? Sam and his wife Jan lived in a beautiful 4-story home, 7 East 76th Street. The Siraks said that's how they got into Impressionism. He didn't consider himself a dealer. All his art was in his home, not a gallery. They saw elegantly furnished rooms with beautiful paintings and Chinese bronzes. He was someone with amazing artworks that he was willing to sell to people he chose to sell them to. They hit it off." Sam was born in Vienna in 1894. When he was a very young man, he went to Paris to paint, but soon realized his talent was to sell others' art. He became friends with Modigliani, Picasso, Soutine, Bonnard, and Vuillard. He offered to sell their paintings for a commission. He moved to New York in 1939, bringing more than 160 paintings with him, and he continued, except during the war, to go on work trips back to Paris and to Europe. In France, he met and befriended the Durand-Ruel family, and that's on the list, whose relatives had been dealers for Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, Cézanne, Sisley, and Degas, and others. He said the family was very wealthy at this time, and in 1959, they named him executor of their paintings. He advised them to move half of their artwork to Geneva, Switzerland, because he foresaw correctly that soon France would not let work they considered national treasures leave France. He rented a vault in a bank for them and one close to theirs for himself. Sometimes he could convince them to sell one to him. The Siraks bought from both of them and also from artists' families, which meant the art often didn't change many hands. This is the front hall. On the left wall hangs Lilacs with a Cup of Milk by Kees van Dongen. Can you see that one? A Dutch painter. He was living at the Bateau Lavoir near Picasso at this time in 1909. When Mrs. Sirak eagerly placed a vase of lilacs next to it, she saw how Van Dongen chose colors and brushstrokes that made her flowers look wimpy. They didn't go together at all. They love how the circular shapes go with the circles in the Delaunay. Did I read this? I told you that already, I think. From Sam, they also, on the left of the door, bought Vuillard's pastel, which I'll show you later, the big tree on the left. The painting on the right side of the doorway is the only other abstract painting in the collection. It is the volume of things by Nicolas de Stael. They were sent catalogs to auction previews, another good way to learn. They saw a Matisse in one of the catalogs and went to New York to see it at the preview, but instead they loved this. As soon as they got home, Howard measured that wall to see if it would fit, and then Knoedler's, the president of Knoedler's, bid for him, and he got it. Their friend Jack Greaves, who taught sculpture at Ohio State, introduced them to the work of an Italian sculptor, Medardo Rosso. He worked around the time of Auguste Rodin, and they knew of one another. The head of a young woman here is wax over plaster. He did very few bronzes, whether it was too expensive or whether he loved the fluidity of the wax. We don't know. Which one is this? This is the big tree. When you looked in the hallway, on the left wall was this pastel, the big tree by Vuillard. And he brings our eyes to the base of the tree where he has flickers of color of little flowers and things by putting the tree trunk right in the front. And Sam bought this from the Vuillard family. There's a charcoal drawing by Matisse here that I don't have a slide of. It was drawn when he was 69 years old, and they found it in a New York gallery. Upstairs, we'll see I don't have the date, an oil painting by Matisse that he painted when he was 26 years old. I'll show that later. This is the library that shows the second Medardo Rosso. It's called The Sick Boy, and it really has that tender, translucent quality that soft wax can have. Basket of grapes above it, we're all familiar with. Mrs. Sirak, when she looked at this, said it is luscious. That was her word for that one. And that was bought from Sam Salts also. And I didn't show this one, but a Bonnard painting, Portrait of Tadej Natanson, is in this room. On the back it says, in remembrance of the summer 1897. That's when Bonnard and Vuillard visited Tadej and Monsieur Natanson. They were great supporters of these young artists and put out a publication periodically called La Revue Blanche that promoted them. Another still life is Still Life by Giorgio Morandi, 1945. He died in 1965, so there were things written about him at that time. So Howard got a book about him and learned about him. After searching for a few years, a dealer in Switzerland flew to their home with the Morandi that they bought, and I don't have a slide of it. But it's jars and bottles, very soft, muted, quiet colors that are on, looks like they're on a table. This is the room, or one of them. This is the dining room. And I should tell you, the notes that I skipped, I have to find them. because when the Siraks first bought the painting Shako with the Red Hat, they put it in their dining room. And Mrs. Sirak said she couldn't eat with it there. It was not relaxing. And the fun is we've named our cafeteria Shako, and that's to get attention, right? So it worked. But they moved this to an upstairs hall. And did you see when I showed it in the upstairs hall? Okay. But that was originally put in here. They were so careful about where they placed things. Word got around that they were collectors, and every week people would send them transparencies or catalogs for them to look at, and maybe every 3 or 4 months they'd take a trip to New York or else contact the catalog overseas or something. But the L. Hutton Galleries was having a centennial exhibit of Yavlensky, the one who did Shako. And they went to see it, and they loved Shako with the Red Hat. It was on hold for the Guggenheim Museum, but fortunately, the Guggenheim bought a different one that was a little larger. Let me find where I'm up to. This was a wonderful room to tour. Every time we went, we'd all be assigned different areas. And on a sun-filled day, I think this faced south. This was absolutely beautiful. The Rodin in the window is a half size. There was a full-size one done first, and Rodin was accused of casting a live human being. It was so natural and realistic. He had to find someone to find the mercenary soldier, Italian mercenary soldier, who posed for him in the freezing cold. And indeed, he was cleared of any suspicion that he hadn't done it by himself. But you could see on this sculpture all of the fingerprints that Rodin had put on the clay as he worked. And it was on like a Lazy Susan stand, and we were allowed to turn it when we had our tour going, so they could see all the different angles of the body. It was absolutely beautiful to do. Springtime at Ben Cour was also in the dining room, the one that has the tree shadows that were green going backwards, and it was a square painting. And that one and the Maurice the Vuillard that I'll show you soon, Rue de Montenay, were the first two that they bought on their first visit to Sam Salt's. Melanie, the school teacher, was in this room. Over the fireplace was this one, the Siet Pourvie. No, did I get that right? Seascape at Pourvie. And this was done at the northern coast of France, overlooking the English Channel. And Bud Bishop made a big point of telling us when he showed us this, that this was a French sky. It was very, and I think I have a picture of the Sicily, which we'll see in the living room. And Bud Bishop stressed that this is an English sky because Sicily was half English and half French. This is a Sicily. This is an English sky, boatyards at Saint-Malo. Also in the dining room was Sheet of Music, Pipe and Pen by Juan Gris. This is done the same year as the Juan Gris that we have from the Howland collection. And Mrs. Sirak said she's sure it was the same tubes of paint. The colors are so close. They went to an art dealer who told them he had a wonderful Mondrian he wanted to show them and sell to them. And they saw this and they asked if that was for sale, and they bought that. Now, one thing we were told as docents, but now she's published it in her book, so I think I can say it. Bud Bishop gave us a list of things as touring docents, Sirak docents, we were not to mention. One was price, and of course that's in the publication that you'll get a copy of to members. The other one was that Mrs. Sirak flew in, bought the same weekend this one, Greece, and later I'm going to show you the Cezanne bather, seated bather, and they brought them home on the airplane in paper bags. You can't do that anymore. Things have changed, and we weren't to tell anybody that. But it's in her book, so it's out now. The Beautiful Gypsy Girl by Renoir, charcoal, and it has, in person, you can just see all the wonderful colors in that. That was in the dining room. And Severini's Rhythm of the Dance, a futuristic piece. And she mentioned to us one of her visitors who came to visit was Arnaldo Pomodoro. And he was thrilled to see this and the other Italian pieces that they had in their collection, like the Morandi and the Rossos. Now we're in the living room. The very first one on your far left is the first painting, along with Springtime at Bencourt, that they bought from Saint-Saults the first time they went there. Next to it is the Willow, the Great Willow by Monet, and I'll show a frontal of that later. Next is Houses on the Foot of the Cliff by Edgar Degas. And, this is the one that was in the far left, the first painting they bought along with Springtime at Bencourt from Saint-Saults. This is Rue de Montigny by Utrillo, Maurice Utrillo. And this is the Degas that we have that has the up look like the Japanese did. I'm sorry, I hit that. Next to that was Seated Dancer, also by Degas. To the left of the fireplace is the Marketplace of Pontoise by Camille Pissarro. That's a gouache. Monet's The Senate Poirier was painted in 1884, is over the fireplace. And we were also told that this was called The Gust of Wind. We were told that Monet kept this for years, and he finally sold it to his friend Sacha Guitry, who was getting married to Yvonne Printemps, and he wrote on the back of it, and it's still there, "En mon ami Sacha, Claude Monet, 1920. This is the Gust of Wind, or Poirier over the fireplace. And this is the Sicily Sky. And this is by Pissarro, also in the living room. Boats and Barges, the Stone Bridge and Barges at Rouen, 1883. From a distance, it looks so gray, and when you get close, it has all kinds of small little pieces of brush strokes in a lot of different colors. There's a sculpture by Charles Despiaux called Mademoiselle Gerard near this, and we were told that Despiaux was one of Rousseau's chief assistants. Another view of the living room. The portrait of the painter Etienne Theroux by André Durand was a painting Sam worked years to buy. When Theroux died, it went to his daughter, Madame Comte, and she wanted to keep it, but he visited her every summer, and finally she said, "I'll sell it to you." Breakfast, and that's where the Sicily is. You see it on the far left there. And then these, Mrs. Sirak called her three ladies. The first one is The Breakfast by Edgar Degas, 1894. It shows a woman eating breakfast unaware that anyone's watching her. Back in 1984, we were told we could call this a keyhole painting. But nowadays, with electronics, I don't think we talk about looking at people when they're not knowing you're looking at them. Is that right? Things have changed. Sam told us that he loved this painting, and when he was sick with the flu in Paris, Henri Rouault, who owned it and knew how much he liked it and wanted to buy it, gave it to him to have while he was ill. And he never gave it back, and finally they sold it to him. And these are the three ladies. Mrs. Sirak called these the three ladies. I'll get back to Christine embroidering there. And then on the right, on the right is the model by Maurice de Vlaminck, 1905. Sometimes it was called Nude Seated Before a Fireplace. Sam Saltz one day brought them into a room, and it hadn't been there before. It had Cézanne's seated bather. And he said, I've made a decision, you may buy it. And that was when they also had bought the Juan Gris that weekend, and they brought them both home. It's not a good picture, but on the left is Seated Bather by Cézanne. In the middle is the Matisse that Matisse did when he was 26 years old. He had an episode with his appendix, and he was in bed for a while recovering. And his mother, just so he had something to do when he was 26, bought him paper and pencils and paint, watercolors, and he started painting, and that was his beginning of being an artist. The one on the right is The Two Graces by Rouen, and Mrs. Sirak's father said it reminds him, you know how we all bring our ideas to the artwork, it reminds him of Naomi and Ruth. Other people see all the gold in it and the quietness of it. This was the last painting they bought. They were invited up to the dining room with Jan and Sam Saltz, and this hadn't been on the wall before, but it was on the wall, and they both started to cry, and he said, I'll let you buy this one. They got home, and both agreed, Howard and Babette, that their collection was over. This was it. By this time, the art wasn't financially, in this kind of art, possible for them to continue to buy. And I wanted to say, at the last time I gave the talk to the training docents last week, someone asked, did they ever collect any more art? They always collected art after that and had many of the more modern artists hanging on their walls. And she and, was it Susan Saxby, worked in the Winning Image Gallery here in Columbus. You know, that's it. Does anyone have any questions? Yes? Yes?
Do we know the price that they paid for any of those paintings at that time?
We were not told. At least, I never heard any individual prices. In the publication, they mentioned what it was appraised at in 1983 when they made the agreement, and and what we paid them for it, and that's in that information.
It was 19 million, right?
Yeah, it was. They donated 11 million. We paid 8 million, so it was 19 million. And
Value at that time was 19 million.
yes, but wasn't it 93 million by the time we got it, or something?
Yeah, but also what happened, you know, the IRA after that changed rules because you could get a hefty deduction for the 11 million. So there were a lot of people in Columbus who were not saying, oh, hooray, you know, they were saying, oh, yeah, big deal, you know, they 80 million, they still keep that much money. But when you think 18 million, good Lord, what do you get for 18 million? I almost think this was close to a million when they bought it. It was the very last one, and it was the most expensive one that they bought. But of course, by that time it was 1972, and they started.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned. Sam bought this one in 1976, and he sold it to them in 1977. That's what I had in my notes. Is that right?
Oh, I thought it was 72 that began, but you're fine. You did all the research. It was
No.
one.
Anyway.
You know what was fun? We were 20 Sirak docents, and then you had to choose one of the paintings, and you held a seminar. So of course I always had Chapo in my head, and being German and all that stuff. But there was a Bexley docent, and she had Chapo. So I thought, I'm not going to ask for Chapo. I'm going to go for the Kirchner. At least I'm going to get that one. Well, this Bexley docent then came to me and said, would you mind changing with me? Because there isn't anything written in English about Jawlensky. And it was true at the time, because I actually got my research materials and books from Germany, and even at the OSU library, you could not find anything in English about him. And so then it went on, and then when I did my research, I found out that, of course, Jawlensky was with Gabriele Münter and Kandinsky, and they lived in Munich. Guess where they lived? In the Gisela Straße. So I mean, this was going to be my presentation. Well, thank you. But it was just like one work, 1 hour, where we had to make these presentations. And I tell you, this Klaus was his name.
Bill Klaus.
He came more than once to teach us. He was such an exclusive club there, and then of course the training sessions at the time, money was paid for teachers, right? And so they paid a heck of a lot of money if you prove that Klaus is his name, right?
Yeah, Bill Klaus.
He would give these worldwide kind of art seminars.
You can borrow from the library.
What?
You can borrow his seminars from the library.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your?
I had Juan Grease.
Come on down, I want to get a picture of everybody.
And, well, let me see. I'm fine. And we were told, I'll sit here. We were told that that it was Greece. We got a pronunciation sheet, and I'm going to put that in the Sirak file. But I think all of you can pronounce things better than I can. I didn't print it out for you.